Next, we have our Global Regulatory Panel. This will be on the international collaboration and reliance. For this panel, before I introduce our moderator, this is a great chance to interact with the panel using our platform. I recommend to either use the chat function or the question function, and we can get the questions in chat that you have over to our moderator, so you may participate yourself in the panel. With that, I would like to introduce Mr. Bob Tribe, no stranger to ISPE. He is the Asia Pacific Regulatory Affairs Advisor for ISPE. Bob joined the Therapeutic Goods Administration, TGA, Australia in 1971 as a GMP inspector, having worked in the pharmaceutical industry in a senior quality assurance position. He became the chief GMP inspector in 1980, and then he started his own company, Bob Tribe Consulting, and has assisted many GMP regulatory authorities around the world to reach PICS level of regulatory control. With that, I'd like to introduce Bob Tribe to the stage.
Thank you, Jeff. Welcome to this panel discussion on international collaboration and reliance. And thank you, Paul and Jenny, for your presentations. We're going to have two additional people join the panel, Dr. Joey Gouws and Mr. Sia Chong Hock. Dr. Gouws, she is currently the team leader of WHO Prequalification Inspection Program and is based in Geneva, Switzerland. Prior to joining WHO, she was the head of the National Medicines Regulatory Authority in South Africa. And she's also been the chairperson of PICS in 2014 and 2015. Mr. Sia is well known to many of the ISPE Singapore audience. He's currently an advisor for HSA Singapore, and he's the immediate chairman of the ASEAN Joint Sectorial Committee on GMP Inspections. This COVID pandemic has really taught regulators to look for alternative ways of doing GMP inspections and to rely on each other to help them make determinations on GMP compliance. So this panel will be discussing some of those alternatives and some of the reliance issues that they need to focus on. There's one question that's come up, which I'll just from the audience. As for you, Paul, if you don't mind answering this one, how do you think, you have mentioned the implementation timelines, two implementation periods, 1 year and 2 year. Will it be expected that all participating authorities will follow this timeline, or will it depend on each country to make their own determination on the timelines?
Very good question. You know, PICS will be advancing with an implementation period that will align very well with the European Commission. Once we have the publication, it'll be a 1 year period for implementation, with exception to that section on lyophilizers that will have a 2 year implementation period. That said, not all regulatory authorities within PICS will directly adopt PICS guidance. So PICS is about harmonization, and as long as participating authorities have sufficiently harmonized approaches in place, then they're aligning with membership expectations. So participating authorities that don't directly adopt the PICS guidance may have different strategies or processes to facilitate review and assessment of their existing GMP frameworks to determine any changes that might be needed to facilitate harmonization and align with commitments under PICS. And so this could result in some differing timelines for publications and implementation by various PICS participating authorities.
So when you mention implementation periods, these are sort of transition periods, are they?
Yeah, it's when we'll be enforcing the new Annex 1. So it will be a 1-year period before we really start enforcing the provisions of the new Annex 1.
Okay. And
after
Jenny,
publication.
Jenny, another question. It's understood that ICMRA is introducing a 12-month trial on collaborative hybrid inspections. And I know TGA is not part of that, but those agencies that are taking part are EMA, Health Canada, MHRA, and Visa and PMDA Japan. Can you give us a little bit more information on that and whether it's likely that that trial program will be expanded to include other agencies in the future? And maybe explain what ICMRA is for the audience.
International Coalition of, I can't remember the acronym.
Control agencies, yeah.
That's correct. Yeah, so ICMRA have put together a pilot, if you like, for hybrid inspections with the agencies that you did describe. And the scope for that working group is looking at manufacturers that are initial manufacturers or looking at a marketing authorization. So it is quite specific. It's not not necessarily selecting more general manufacturers for re-inspections, but it is selecting those ones for a registration of products for their agreed for their own jurisdictions. It is a pilot. It is a learning, looking at how work can be done in a hybrid setting. In terms of whether that will continue, potentially, I think they're looking at this hybrid to see what outcomes they're going to get from it. And potentially it could be expanded to looking at sites that are common for all these agencies and broadening that scope outside of registration and, you know, for specific products. So yes, it's still being, how do you call it, scoped, I guess. You know, there is a plan and it's going to start in, I think, in Q3. But there's still a bit more work that needs to be done in terms of what it's going to look like. But, you know, with any pilot, you know, there's always learnings and there's always potential for increasing scope and making it maybe business as usual, if that's possible.
Thanks, Jenny. Paul, I know Health Canada is part of this trial. Do you want to add anything that Jenny has just said?
No, I think Jenny's done a wonderful summary. It's going to give us a wonderful opportunity to explore how this can work and whether we want to be expanding on the pilot that we have underway. And I think there's some really exciting opportunities here as we work through the process.
Right. Another question for you, Paul. What is the extent of mutual reliance amongst PICS member inspectorates? For example, would the US FDA or Health Canada rely on GMP inspections conducted by TGA or HSA Singapore, either in those countries or in other countries like India and China?
You know what, it's an absolutely wonderful question. You know, I think it's going to be really important to just share a little bit of background information with you too. So PICS, in cooperation with the International Coalition of Medicines Regulatory Authorities, that's ICMRA, has published guidance on GMP inspection reliance back in 2018, I believe. This guidance is designed to promote enabling informed decisions on the GMP compliance of a manufacturing facility to be made based on the outcomes of inspections by other regulatory authorities. So with the complexity of global supply chains, the demand for inspecting pharmaceutical manufacturing facilities, it far exceeds what any national competent authority can accomplish. And this framework is designed to assist regulators in managing product quality risks posed by the increasing complex pharmaceutical supply chain by enabling inspection reliance. And so the inspection reliance also reduces the burden and costs of hosting and responding to regulatory inspections by pharmaceutical manufacturing facilities. So in general, inspection reliance can be applied by any PICS participating authority, but the application of the inspection reliance is voluntary among PICS participating authorities. PICS and other regulatory forums where international partners come together, such as ICMIR, promote international inspection reliance. Within Canada, I honestly think that we're one of the jurisdictions that leads in the application of inspection reliance. We could typically perform maybe over 600 desktop assessments using inspections from PICS participating authorities in any given year. This includes inspections conducted within jurisdiction or extra-jurisdictional, along with 800 from our MRA partners. So when you start to think about these numbers, it shows the significant impact that mutual reliance can have. I've done some rough estimates on the return on investment calculations, and the ROI is just simply amazing by being able to have confidence in compliance information from trusted partners through qualified, robust systems. When it comes down to others such as India or China, they aren't part of the PICS family at this point in time, and so we haven't been able to establish that trust reliance to be able to rely on their inspections. Thanks.
Thanks, Paul. Sia, what's the extent of mutual reliance amongst ASEAN inspectorates? For example, would HSA rely on the inspection carried out by the Philippine FDA, either in the Philippines or in India?
Okay. The 10-member ASEAN member states have actually got a mutual recognition agreement that was signed way back in 2009. 5 ASEAN member states have fully implemented this MRA. They are Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, and the Philippines. But amongst these 5 ASEAN member states, only 4 are members of PICS or PICS. That is Singapore HSA, Malaysia NPRA, Indonesia NADFC, and the Thai FDA. So among these 4 agencies or regulators, we mutually accept one another's inspection report. But in the case of FDA Philippines, which is not a member of PICS yet, we only recognize the inspection reports that cover pharmaceutical product and in-finished dosage forms, not inspection of biopharmaceutical manufacturers nor API manufacturers. This is because the scope of the current ASEAN MRA is only restricted to pharmaceutical products in finished dosage form. As for India, India is not a member of ASEAN, neither is India a member of PICS, so we do not recognize inspection that are carried out by the Indian drug regulator. For Indian manufacturing facilities, if there were an inspection conducted by a third PICS inspectorate, then Singapore HSA will recognize that inspection, although the manufacturer is located in India. Thank you.
Thank you, Sia. Jerry, I've got a question here in relation to WHO. To what extent does WHO rely on inspections carried out by PICS member authorities? And similarly, do PICS member authorities rely on WHO inspection outcomes? And thirdly, does WHO share its inspection reports with PICS and vice versa?
Thanks, Bob. The question is a mouthful. So let me just quickly start. And before I talk about the role of WHO and how we see the different types of inspections, I would just like to invite the audience's attention to the definition, to the WHO definition of regulatory reliance. I think that's a very, very important point to start at. If we look at the definition, it talks about giving account and significant weight to assessment performed by another regulatory authority or trusted institution or to any other authority and information, and then meeting and reaching its own decision. So I think if we look at that specific definition, it's very clear that Reliance, WHO is not saying that Reliance, with Reliance, you must adapt and adopt in totality a decision from any other regulatory authority. It actually means you make your own decision and you can rely on certain aspects. So to go back to your specific point in your question, WHO rely quite extensively on work being done by other stringent regulatory authorities that WHO align themselves with. We perform desk assessments, just as my colleagues had spoken about. We look at exactly what was inspected, which areas had been covered, which products had been covered, and then we make our own decision in terms of that specific company and the GMP status of that specific company. Similarly, WHO have been called on widely by our colleagues and other regulatory authorities to share our inspection reports with them so that they can make their decision and make an informed decision on the GMP status of that specific manufacturing facility. So what WHO is also doing on our website, and specifically under the heading of the inspectorate section, we publish the WHO Public Information Report, which is a summary of the inspection that we have done at a specific company, so that any person from the public, including other regulatory authorities, can download that specific inspection report and make use of it. The inspection report is redacted so that there's no information, proprietary information being shared. And if the company, if the regulatory authority then wants the full inspection report, we discuss with the manufacturer, and we then share the full inspection report with the regulatory authority. So in short and sweet, WHO rely extensively on our PICS members, and we also see that PICS members rely extensively on the work that WHO has been doing over the past years insofar as inspections. Thanks, Bob.
Thank you, Joey. And just another question, Joey. I understand WHO has done many GMP inspections of COVID vaccine manufacturers in China. Can you share a little bit of information about that, and whether the reports of those inspections are made available to other regulators around the world?
Thanks, Bob. Yes, indeed. I think during the COVID period and during the lockdown, WHO was the only regulatory, I would call it authority in brackets, that actually did perform inspections in China due to the huge demand on the requirement and the status of the manufacturers in China that manufactured COVID, the various COVID vaccines. We packed our bags as WHO and we went to China. It was a very, very difficult inspection or inspections due to the extensive quarantine period that our team had to go into. In some cases, we had to spend up to 3 weeks in quarantine before we could start the inspections. So those inspection reports, summary of those inspection reports are also on the WHO website. And we also make the full inspection report available. We've shared it extensively with our colleagues in EMEA through the mutual recognition that we've signed with EMEA and even with FDA. So these reports are available and they can be requested from WHO for sharing. Thanks, Bob.
Thanks, Joey. And just to extend that question, what about inspections in India of vaccine manufacturers? Have you done those inspections as well?
I'm sorry, Bob, just repeat.
COVID vaccine manufacturers in India, have you inspected them?
Yes, thanks, Bob. Sorry, I didn't get the name. Yes, indeed, we have been to India extensively. We have inspected, if you refer to specifically the COVID vaccines that's manufactured in India, we've inspected all of those that had submitted applications to WHO. The inspection reports again has been shared with the regulatory authorities that requested that, but then through the through mutual recognition and agreements that had been signed between WHO and the country or the regulatory authority. And if there was no mutual recognition agreement, we actually approached the manufacturer of the specific site, and we requested authority from the manufacturer to actually share that inspection report then with the regulatory authority that called on that specific report. So indeed, we have also done that through mutual recognition. Thanks, Bob.
Thank you, Joey. Joey, you mentioned the WHO provides inspection reports on its website. And there are many other GMP inspection databases available for agencies around the world and maybe for the industry. There's the UDRA GMP database, there's an FDA ComStat database, WHO, and this is a question for all the panelists. Can regulatory authorities access all these databases, and can industry access some of these databases?
I can talk about WHO, Bob, and indeed, it's an open website that we have. So even the public can access that specific inspection report, although it's abbreviated inspection report, giving information about the specific site. I must also mention that we only publish WHO public information report on our website if the site was positive that we've inspected. If there was a specific concerns about the site, and we know that a specific site had been distributing products globally to our stakeholders in the low and middle income countries, or to our stakeholders in terms of the United Nations agreements, we would then publish a notice of concern on our website, and that notice of concern is also available to the public. It talks about the site. It talks about the identified non-compliances that we have seen, and it also talks about the products that we had then inspected and relates to that specific site. So it's quite transparent. The WHO website is quite transparent and try to give positive as well as negative information about a specific site so that regulators can make an informed decision when they need to pronounce on a specific manufacturing facility. Thanks, Bob.
Are any of the other panelists want to add to what Joey said?
Sure, I'd be happy to add a little bit. Just from information from the Canadian side of things, Canadian inspectors do have access to UDRA GMP and FDA ComStat. I really want to highlight the FDA has a wonderful new data dashboard, I think is what they call it, that's publicly accessible. And that data dashboard can be used by industry to inform when there might be a need to follow up on compliance matters with other companies in their supply chain or before entering into supply agreements. I'd also like to make mention that we have a publicly accessible inspection database in Canada as well. So if you type the words Canada and DHPID into any search engine, it should take you to our drug and health product inspection database that covers many of our inspection programs. It includes drug inspections and establishment licensing. The database is live, so when we start a new inspection, it indicates that an inspection is in progress, highlighting the name of the establishment, addresses, activities that are underneath the licensing framework, any terms and conditions that might apply. It will include the rating for completed inspections, a historical summary of inspections that have been conducted, a high-level summary of observations for our on-site inspections, And additionally, we also list when we make licensing decisions for foreign buildings based on GMP evidence assessment that we have relied on from others and the dates of those inspections from our partners.
Sia and Jenny, do you want to add to that?
Okay, I will go first.
Okay.
Yes, Singapore HSA has access to all the websites that have been mentioned. The WHO website, of course, is published. It's available not only to the regulators, but to the industry as well. We have access also to the UDRA GMP, FDA ComStat, but we have to apply to the FDA and to EMA for permission. And they are granted to the regulator that applies for it, but unfortunately not to the industry. So, and as for HSA, we only publish the licensing status and the GMP compliance status. GMP inspection reports of individual manufacturers have not been published in a public-facing website, but we do share the inspection report with the manufacturer, the auditee. And going forward, Singapore is going to be very much involved in WHO as a maturity level 4 authority, as well as going forward, perhaps a WHO listed authority. Then we will be sharing inspection reports with practically any NRA that requests for it, any third party, but of course under confidentiality arrangement, and as well as with the permission of the information owner, if it is going to be unredacted. And also, when it comes to observation, we also do not publish observations of individual manufacturers to the public, but we do publish aggregated GMP deficiencies and make a presentation every year at an industry event. Thank you. Over to you, Jenny.
So from the TGA perspective, we do have access to the UDRA GMP and FDA ComStat databases. Just like Mr. Sia said, we do apply to get access to those databases, and we do use those databases for to inform us of, you know, a history of particular sites, and it's useful not only for inspections but also for our compliance verification processes, you know, our desktop assessment processes that have been in place for a number of years, where we confirm the information, you know, from a manufacturer in terms of current inspections and compliance rating. So that's very useful for us. In terms of our own databases, so TGA does have a database, and it's publicly facing on the TGA website in terms of licensed manufacturers in Australia. So it does talk about who's licensed in Australia and for what authorizations as well. So that's publicly facing. In terms of publishing information, the TGA doesn't publish their outcomes from inspection. However, we do have annual performance reports that are available on the TGA website that do talk about which manufacturers, you know, attained a satisfactory GMP compliance rating during the year. So we don't publish reports, we don't publish you know, findings from inspections, but we do, with the annual performance report, put a summary together of, you know, manufacturers that have attained, say, A1, you know, a compliance rating, A1, A2 compliance rating for that year. So that's as far as we go. In terms of deficiencies, very similar to Mr. Sia as well, we do have a lot of education and a lot of reporting on, you know, types, the most common kind of deficiencies we come across per sector as well, the different types of sectors, and we put that out there, and it informs industry of the type of issues, you know, the type of things that we're picking up, and they take that on board in terms of education and other things that they look for as well to try and improve compliance. And yeah, it's a bit of information for them as well to be able to see the kind of things that are coming out from industry, and that also leads to further training. If there's an issue in a particular area, then it informs further education, further presentations in that particular area.
Thank you, Jenny. And I guess TGA also shares inspection reports with other regulatory authorities where requested.
Correct, where requested, and depends on whether we've got a MOU or MRA, some confidentiality agreements in place as well. That's correct, and we could do that.
Okay. There's a question that's come from the audience. I'll read it out. How do different, and it's related to this question of databases and sharing information. How do different regulatory bodies, agencies share their findings, especially for new technology, such as mRNA, gene technology, and cell therapy products? Is there a platform where regulatory bodies can go into to find them, or only from inspection report findings? Any of the panelists like to volunteer to answer that one?
I guess I can take a first response on this one. From a PICS framework, it usually derives from a request. So one agency requesting another agency to share information about an inspection, and then following the framework within PICS that enables sharing of that information can occur in an unredacted framework as well. Now, there's actually some really exciting work that's underway here. Within the scope of ICMRA, there is a new project that's being developed. And this project is designed to enable a broader information sharing platform in terms of pharmaceutical quality knowledge management systems that has a long-term design to enable the sharing of GMP compliance information as well as drug submission information. And if you take a look at ICMRA's website, you'll be able to see some of the developments on this. And I'm hoping for a reflection paper to be published in the very near future on this. So there's some absolutely exciting work that's coming together through international collaborations to help facilitate improved sharing of information.
So we can expect to see some position papers published very soon, Paul?
Absolutely. It's something that should be published in the very near future on various websites through a collaboration between ICMRA, PICS, and ICH. And it's an absolutely wonderful initiative that's underway. It is going to take some time. It's a long-term project, and we're anticipating that it could be upwards of 10 years before we have this in place, but just an absolutely fantastic initiative that was driven by ICMRA.
And does industry get to have an input into those position papers, or is it mainly just the regulators who make the decisions?
Very, very good question. It is primarily driven by regulators, but industry is involved. So ICH is involved, which means industry bodies that are related to ICH are involved in the process, and the entire process is ensuring that there is a degree of industry engagement in the entire process as well.
Oh, that's very good. And you've got a PICS committee meeting coming up in October. I guess there could be a lot of very interesting things that come out of that committee meeting, such as a release date for Annex 1.
Oh no, I'm hoping that Annex 1 is released before the PICS committee meeting.
Okay.
We're looking at end of September to hopefully have the publication of Annex 1 within the PICS website and through that of EMA as well.
Okay. Well, it's good to know it's Annex 1's very close by the sounds of it.
So Bob, maybe I can also add a little bit of a comment on that specific point. When we look at the EMEA process, the WHO is also involved with as an observer. These type of questions or complex issues raised by industry is actually coming to the EMEA, and it's then extensively being discussed at EMEA amongst the regulators sitting there as a question to the regulators, and following from that specific debate, it then goes back to the regulatory authority that had raised the question, and then back to the specific manufacturer. And again, I also want to support what Paul was saying. The ICMRA initiative is extensive. I think we're going to see some lot of changes and changes for the better in terms of regulatory compliances, as well as regulatory interactions, and as well as regulatory decision making, where we will see rapid interactions and integration and analysis of the quality aspects that has been raised by a specific regulatory authority, or changes that the manufacturer want to implement, and across then the ICMRA platform, where rapid decisions will be made through this knowledge management tool that is being put on the table by ICMRA. Thanks.
Well, that's great news for international collaboration and reliance, I think. But Joey, while you're there, I understand WHO will simply adopt Annex 1, the revised Annex 1, without change. Is that correct?
No, unfortunately not.
Oh, okay.
WHO has looked at Annex 1 also extensively. We have been part of the working group. WHO has been feeding our comments into Annex 1 also quite extensively. There are at the moment still about 3 specific points that WHO need to discuss amongst their member states to finalize. So it's little, I would call it little points, some editing points. So we will then go back to EMEA and advise on that specific 3 points that is still awaiting the WHO finalization. Thanks, Bob.
Okay.
Well,
yes.
Well, yeah, I'll add on Singapore's perspective to the Annex 1. As a PICS member, Singapore will adopt the Annex 1 per se as verbatim. It's also because of the way our laws are written that we will take the latest version of the PICS GMP guide and the annexes. But in terms of implementation, what we will do is during the first cycle of inspection, after the publication of the latest amendment, we will treat any observations as an area for improvement or a recommendation. It's only at the subsequent inspection cycle, which is going to be about 2 years down the road, then any non-conformity to the latest requirement will be regarded as an observation. So this is the way we deal with it. Thank you.
And Jenny, I guess the same for TGA. You'll adopt Annex 1, revised Annex 1 unchanged.
We will, as unchanged, but it won't be an automatic adoption because our legislation doesn't permit automatic adoption. So we would need to go through a consultation with peak bodies, but looking at obviously a gap analysis between the current version, which will be very interesting to do a gap analysis with the current and the future one, looking at whether we're increasing regulatory burden, because that is part of what we need to do as a government department, and how we will mitigate that. Certainly there'll be guidance documents that will need to be written, through PICS, and no doubt we'll probably have our own interpretive guidance as well in terms of some specific things that are a pain point for industry for us to look at. And then we'll look at implementation, but this transition, I'm hearing 1 year and 2 years, and I'm thinking, I think it might be a bit longer for us after that, given that we, because of our framework. So no doubt it may take us a bit longer. Not 1 year, not adopted in September, and the 1 and 2 years, but nevertheless, we'll have to include those in our process and try and get adoption as soon as we can. But it is all subject to agreement from industry as well, and then we go through the process that we need to go through, and if everything's okay, we adopt, and we have transition periods like everybody else. So
and there will obviously be need for a lot of training, not just for industry but also for inspectors. So this is where organisations such as ISPE and PDA can perhaps help, particularly with the industry training. But there could be some future seminars coming up on the new.
Correct. I mean, that's what's happened in the past, where we've had associations facilitate some of these trainings as well, including the regulator, the TGA being at these sessions. So there could be scope like we've done in the past. Correct.
Yeah. So this is another question. Maybe, Paul, you can answer this, but the other panelists, if you want to jump in. We've got agencies from China, India, Pakistan who are wanting to become members of PICS. And the question is, when they do become members, how much will other PICS members rely on their inspection outcomes?
Excellent question. Just to reflect a little bit, we shared some really exciting news last year. I think it was September of 2021. By announcing that China's National Medicinal Products Administration, NMPA, submitted an application for pre-accession to PICS. So this is a voluntary but recommended assessment step that can be completed before submitting a full application to become a PICS participating authority. The pre-accession procedure provides for up to 2 years to help pre-applicant understand any gaps between PICS requirements and its regulatory compliance program. The reason why I want to mention this process is both the 2-year pre-accession process and the accession process take time. So up to 6 years for the accession process. This time period, along with the robust assessment processes, builds relations, builds trust, and it enables PICS participating authorities to have confidence in new members once they have completed the accession process. So if and when China, India, or others become PICS members, then this robust assessment process enables the potential for other PICS members to be able to rely on the outcomes from their local inspections.
I share exactly the same views as what Paul have said. In Singapore, we operate a very straightforward, simple policy when it comes to PICS membership and foreign inspection. So if China, if Pakistan or India were to become a PICS member in the future, we will accept them just like any other PICS participating authority. Paul have said that in some countries like, say, China, NNPA, there is even a pre-accession journey. Then there's the accession journey, and eventually a very rigorous assessment by a team or teams from PICS. So we would, in view of this background, recognize the inspection reports from this newly emerging PICS member. But having said this, should there be any manufacturing irregularities that comes out via various sources, feedback internationally, via the PICS rapid alert system, then Singapore HSA, we do reserve the right to conduct on-site inspection on our own if necessary. Thank you.
Well, yes, maybe I can also just add a little bit before you go to the next question. I think your question has a lot of answers. And I think when we look at the process of the PICS assessment, it's actually the assessment of the inspectorate from the regulatory authority. It's not an assessment of the industry. So over time, any regulatory authority then builds trust on the work that they are doing. So I think whenever we will then be able to fully rely on the work that another regulatory authority has done, you have to build that specific trust and make sure that you can rely on that specific regulatory authority. So the moment that a regulatory authority then gets PICS membership or even WHO assessment through the benchmarking process that I will talk a little bit later in one of my presentations, and where Singapore has just been reached a maturity level 4, WHO, from our perspective, we will need to build trust with that specific regulatory authority to understand the scope of their inspections, to understand the extent of their inspections, and also to understand the experience and competency of that specific regulatory authority in doing inspections. So over time, the moment that a regulatory authority gets a specific qualification, I don't think we will all jump into the swimming pool with a regulatory authority. We will gradually then over a period of time build that trust and then start relying on that specific regulatory authority. Thanks, Bob.
Thanks, Joey. Paul, this is a question about PICS Inspection Reliance. Does PICS keep metrics on the inspection reliance, for instance, where duplicate same scope inspections are carried out? Do you keep data on that to maybe try and encourage PICS members to rely on each other more?
You know, I've mentioned the PICS guidance on inspection reliance. And when we implemented this back in 2018, we began collecting some metrics on the implementation of inspection reliance among our members. And quite frankly, the metrics collected to date clearly indicate that we have some work ahead of us to encourage and promote inspection reliance among PICS participating authorities. So to this end, we've created a PICS working group on inspection reliance to help break down the barriers that prevent implementation of inspection reliance. If you wish, I'd be happy to expand on the goals of this working group a little bit later, but you brought up a really important point on public availability and transparency. So the current metrics have some sensitivities, but I'd like to bring back a message to PICS that there is an opportunity for us to improve transparency on this PICS project, where metrics could be presented differently to enable external communication pieces. And this could be done in part with a new PICS strategic plan that will be launched in the near future here, which includes an objective for increased transparency.
Well, that's good news. I'm wondering if industry could help in some way with providing you with information, or providing PICS with information about any same scope inspections which are duplicated.
You know, the support of industry and ISPE is always welcomed. I want to note that I've greatly appreciated metrics that ISPE has shared in the past about duplicate same scope inspections and the costs associated with such inspections. It's really important for industry to keep the conversation going, to help promote and implement inspection reliance as we work to break down the barriers that prevent implementation. So I'll look forward to continued roles of industry and ISPE in supporting implementation of inspection reliance.
Thank you very much, Paul. And we're at the end of our time. I notice the time is nearly up. And I'd like to thank the 4 panelists for wonderful panel discussion. So thank you very much, everybody, for your participation. And look forward to seeing you soon.